This is Technically Legal, podcast about legal technology, innovation in the legal industry, and the impact tech is having on the law. I'm Chad Main, the founder of legal services company Percipient, and on today's show, I'm in conversation with Conrad Everhard. He's one of the founders of the Flatiron Law Group. It's a law firm offering its clients an innovative take on M&A work. I try not to get too much on a soapbox on this show. My main goal has always been to secure guests who can come on the show and share their insights and offer tips about how to innovate and use tech in legal. Today's guest, Conrad Everhard, is one of the founders of the Flatiron Law Group, and he's going to do just that. He offers both insight and how his firms provide an innovative alternative to traditional law firms for clients needing M&A work. In fact, beyond the tech and innovation aspect of this conversation, Conrad also offers a great overview of the M&A legal process for those who may not be completely familiar with it. Let's get back to the soapbox. Whenever I hear the newest and latest billable hour rate in BigLaw, my mind is always blown, especially in M&A, where the rates are now comfortably above $1,000 an hour. In fact, I just saw a study from the Citigroup showing that in 2024, law firms are again going to have a banner year, and I think the number was that fees are up 12% from last year. But why? Why are they up? Unless you're hiring some killer litigator, the new Clarence Darrow, for a piece of bet-the-company litigation, or you want to hire a real connected deal maker to hammer out a particularly impactful transaction, is all legal work really that much? I would argue that a good chunk of it is arguably not. And on some levels, it's even fungible. And this is where Conrad and the Flatiron Model comes in. Conrad knows all about the billable hour and expensive fees. Before he founded Flatiron, he worked in BigLaw. He's going to tell us why he left BigLaw to found Flatiron, and the reason being he wanted to provide a more cost-effective and efficient way to offer legal services to clients involved in mergers and acquisitions. To do so, the Flatiron Law Group leverages a three-pronged model. They keep their overhead low, they use general contract labor to assist with the more labor-intensive volume parts of the M&A deal, and they also really leverage technology, including the firm's own custom-built deal driver software that provides its clients with data and other insight about the deals they're working on. Conrad's work also caught the attention of Stanford's Codex project, where he's helping them develop an AI-based negotiation simulator to train young lawyers in M&A deals. He's going to tell us all about that, and he's also going to tell us the importance of capturing the decision-making process of senior lawyers to effectively train the AI. All right, let's get to my conversation with Conrad Everhard.
You know, I looked at your background, and it's all law. You were at Jones Day, Bryan Cave, K&L, you were associate at other firms prior to that. So did you always want to be a lawyer?
I graduated from the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, believe it or not. So all of us had a choice because the Foreign Service exam and the bar exam was on the same day, and most of us chose to take the bar exam. You're not really trained to do much in life when you graduate from the Foreign Service School. But I thought that I had the right temperament for that, and that's sort of the way I fell into it.
2024, Conrad, would they tell that Conrad to take the other exam, or would you stick with the bar?
You know, I don't know. I've been through a long, circuitous route here over the past few decades, but I'm at a really interesting place right now. I'm a subject matter expert, a senior subject matter expert in a field which has been only lightly disrupted. So I've got an open playing field to do things with that, I wouldn't have been, almost in any other industry, wouldn't have had this opportunity. So, would I have done things differently? I don't know. But I do know that I like where I'm at right now.
I don't want to jump too far ahead because I know we're going to talk about this, but you brought it up, so I'm going to ask this question now. A subject matter expert, obviously, in transactional law, M&A work, that type of stuff. But you're alluding to the fact that AI could displace some of that work. But here's what I think, obviously, is not going to be displaced, maybe ever, probably ever, definitely not anytime soon, is the nuance when you're sitting across the negotiation table, trying to get a deal point, common ground, trying to meet common ground. AI can't do that. So isn't that at the end of the day, the true value of paying, these law firm rates for a lawyer to handle your M&A deal?
Yeah, absolutely. You don't need, and you really shouldn't value that time by the hour. It's a lot more valuable than that. The know-how that the brief interaction and the letter of intent stage between seller counsel and buyer counsel is where enormous amount of value comes in for both sides. And that's a very brief exchange between usually senior level lawyers. And to bill that by the hours is ridiculous. But the BigLaw offsets for that by arbitraging labor and by marking up labor to get to the place they want to be. But they could get there in other ways by pricing their value-added service in a different way, and which we do, actually.
Go back to the point where you said there's real value added during the letter of intent stage. For those of us not as familiar with M&A work as you are, what is that value?
The natural evolution of a merger and acquisition deal is that there's going to be some high level agreement between the parties, between the bankers or the banker and the buyer on purchase price. And then at that point, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. The buyer needs to do due diligence, definitive agreements have to be prepared, consents have to be obtained. But what typically happens is the buyer wants to lock up the target before he or she invests the time to acquire the company. He or she wants to make sure that that target is prevented from negotiating with others. They don't want to be a stalking horse, and they want to justify their investment. So they're going to propose a letter of intent or a term sheet, which is generally non-binding, but has some binding provisions, the lockup being one of them. And that non-binding agreement will set forth the general terms and set out the cadence of the negotiation going forward. And that's where you really lay out the big ticket items, the tax structuring of the transaction, the liability profile, whether there's going to be rep and warranty insurance or there's going to be a holdback or an escrow and how long that's going to be held, things like non-competition covenants, other covenants with respect to employees. That stuff will be set out in a fairly informal way, but in a way that and it's not binding, but in a way that will put a lot of pressure on the deal going forward. So in that brief interaction, which usually happens over a course of a few days, maybe a week, they're going to set out the parameters of the deal. In a lot of cases, when you're representing sellers like we do, we're going to create enormous value. We're going to reduce the exposure from liability, for example, from 50% of the purchase price to 10% of the purchase price. Think about that. The total exposure of the seller is 10% of the purchase price instead of what the buyer originally asked for, which was, much higher. And that value, if I was to price that in terms of hours, would be nominal. I've created some of the best value for my client in that brief interaction.
What's the human bringing to that point in the deal, the early stages of the deal that AI cannot? Because you could push a button and AI could shoot out a letter with several deal points. But what is the human bringing to it? It's where the value's coming from.
This actually goes into our own experience with AI. But what the human is bringing is judgment and knowledge and personality and character to interact with the adversary, a judgment of the opponent's character and a judgment of the opponent's abilities, all those things. To me, AI is a place where you can derive a lot of value in the commodity tasks that need to be done in an M&A deal. But that high-value judgment piece is much more difficult to automate. And frankly, we're trying. We're trying to do that in some of the Stanford work we're doing. We're trying to capture some of the knowledge of senior lawyers like me and direct the model in the right direction. But it was never going to be completely replace the judgment.
Right. You can't automate discretion, right? That's the real key. So let's talk about Flatiron. Your BigLaw, as we talked about just a second ago, BigLaw for a long time. When was it? Why was it that you decided, I got to get out of here? There's a better way of doing stuff. I got to launch Flatiron.
The stars aligned for us 7 or 8 years ago. We became accidental entrepreneurs. We're all BigLaw partners. We're all BigLaw partners that were intrigued by evolution of the business model. We're all BigLaw partners that were involved in initiatives over the past few decades about modernizing the model, and we're frustrated about it and realized that wasn't going to happen in our careers and our career timelines. We found ourselves in a place and time where, the stars aligned. We had all, Lenny, myself, Mark, and we had all left BigLaw after the financial crisis to seek our fortunes in the private sector. We didn't find our fortunes in the private sector, but we got a lot of good experience. And when we came out of that, It was difficult to get back into BigLaw at that point. We had been removed from our books of business at that point for several years, and the economics weren't great. And we were intrigued by the idea of getting outside the firewall and doing something that was really modern.
We ask you there, you said it's hard for you to go back to BigLaw because you've been divorced from the book of business for a while. But you could go to BigLaw and have other people, there'd be work to do from other people, but you decide to go create your own firm. There you got to hustle for work like there's no tomorrow. So what's the distinction you're drawing there?
When you're a person at my level of seniority, if you want to get back into BigLaw, they're looking at how much revenue you're bringing. They look at you purely as a revenue producer. I mean, if you have a specialized expertise, they might bring you in to service their work, but typically they have enough labor to service their historical legacy work. So when you're removed from your book of business for a period of time, it becomes very transactional. It's basically, they'll pay you a percentage of the revenue you can bring in, which isn't all that attractive. And I had other things in mind. The other thing, Chad, is that, I've been looking for decades, since the internet has been evolved in the 1990s at ways to leveraging the internet to challenge the model. And it just was too challenging in a lot of ways to hire lawyers that have expertise. The internet wasn't a platform for doing business for a long time. But by the mid-2010s, by the mid-teens there, a lot had changed, right? The internet had become a recognized commercial platform with SaaS. There were law firms that were doing business on a principally virtual basis. I was at Venture Law Group for a couple of years, Fisher Broyles, Ryman. So there was some acceptance of that. And the other things that were available to us is suddenly we had access to computing power, ASW, Google by the drink. We pay for what we use. We had access to all these tools that are, open source or off the shelf or freeware, all tools of efficiency that were available at very little investment compared to BigLaw's investment in proprietary technology. And the other thing we had, frankly, Chad, is we had access to labor. BigLaw has this Logan's Run kind of thing, right? You're an associate for 10 years. They train you, they teach you, they put you in sophisticated deals. But after 10 years, if you're not showing propensity to generate business, revenue, or if you're not in some very specialized field, you're shown the door. And a lot of those kids wind up, trying to go in-house, but a lot of them wind up bodies for the body shops like Axiom and Bliss and whatever. So I all this 10-year out talent was available for me to pick up, on an outsourced basis. And we can talk about the Flatiron model. So it was an alignment of the stars. We were in a position that we didn't want to go back to BigLaw. We wanted to take a risk. We saw an opportunity to disrupt. And we suddenly had these tools available to us. We had access to labor. We had access to technology. We had market acceptance of using the internet as a commercial platform. All those things came together, fortuitously for us.
I want to get to the Flatiron model. That's my next question. But before that,
Yeah.
you spent a good chunk of your career at BigLaw. So what is it? I don't want to call it anti-BigLaw, but you've got some different ways of thinking than other people. Obviously, are still at BigLaw. What sparked that? Was it always in you?
Yeah, look, I'm fortunately an entrepreneur. So, from the time I was a third or fourth year associate, I was thinking about, how can you do this differently? I was frustrated by the model. I was also frustrated by the unfairness and the inequity of it, driving these kids to bill 3,000,
Right.
4,000 hours. I blew through a marriage. I blew through, they would lost 10 years of my life in the 1990s, so I was always, I don't know if the word is resentful or I had some resentment towards the historical model, but I also, especially as the internet evolved, it became, clearer and clearer that I could produce, or we could produce that quality, that level of quality on a much more efficient basis and charge less and keep the same margin and be disruptive. So I was almost haunted by this vision that there was an opportunity here. And of course, I had to be an orphan from BigLaw to actually grab that opportunity. If I had never left BigLaw, and I'd stayed at Jones Day and I'd stayed attached to the M&A, legacy M&A, silo, Would I have actually done this? Probably not. I mean, it had to be that I was orphaned, 10 years ago. That created this opportunity for me.
Yeah. That I don't dwell on this, but I think that's unspoken a lot, the way it's set up. It does breed resentment on many levels and frustration, and it just burns people out. I mean, that's known, but the actual feelings that it breeds in the people involved, I think a lot of time that goes unsaid.
And the other thing, Chad, is, I spent a lot of time in the tech sector representing young companies, growth companies, and I want to get in the game. I can do that, and I know how to put a deck together. I know how to put a business model together. I want to get in the game.
When we come back in just a couple minutes, Conrad fills us in about the Flatiron legal model and tells us about the work he's doing with Stanford's Codex. I'm Chad Main, and you're listening to Technically Legal.
We need to do more with less. That is the key takeaway nowadays from almost every survey of in-house counsel. But what if it didn't have to be that way? What if you actually could do more for less? By combining legal expertise and technology, Percipient enables legal teams to get more work done for less. Buried in contracts and sales is frustrated with turnaround time? We can help with that. Did you just get hit with a subpoena and reviewing 100,000 documents and files will tax your resources or cost you a small fortune in billable hours? We can help there too. Our team of legal professionals leverage tech and project management principles with the right amount of human oversight to deliver precise, efficient, and cost-effective legal solutions. Whether it's legal operations and contract management support, subpoena compliance, or document review, Percipient is your partner in really doing more for less. Percipient. Legal services powered by technology.
All right, let's get back to my conversation with Conrad Everhard. He's just about to fill us in on the Flatiron Law Group model.
We started with a bland name with, Everhard, Haddad, New Era, whatever, and that has no buzz to it. That's just old school, and it's old fashioned, and we wanted to grab a name that would mean something. And Flatiron in New York is representative of the startup community and the high growth community, the technology community. It's the old Silicon Alley from back when I was an associate. It was available, and we thought it was cool, and now it's gotten really cool.
So tell us the model. How's it work? What is the Flatiron model?
The backstory here is we got outside the BigLaw firewall. We knew we wanted to be disruptive, but beyond that, we didn't really have a big plan. That's the funny thing about all this. A lot of this was accidental. Now, this is 7-8 years ago. We started experimenting with fixed fee pricing, and we were just riffing off the big firm pricing and, just charging a discount to what they're doing. But over the years, we've developed essentially a 3-pronged model, what drives our fixed fee pricing. So backing up for a second, when we switched to fixed fee pricing as our main way to price, that was a paradigm shifting moment. Because then we have to sit down and realize we're not making money marking up junior labor. We're making money maximizing margin. So we had to sit there and think, how do we deliver this service at a level of quality which equals BigLaw that more efficiently so we can maximize margin? And that's how we came to the model we have today. So it's a 3-pronged model. One of them is just riffing off the virtual platforms out there like VLP, where I was, Venture Law Group. It's just a low overhead distributed model. We practice, using SaaS-based products, a SaaS-based practice platform. I'm sitting here in my sister's place in the Tetons. We can be anywhere. We do have some office space, and we work outside Penn Station, but we keep a tight lid on overhead, and so do they. But that's where we distinguish ourselves. Secondly, we talked about labor before. We started deploying what is essentially a general contractor labor model. We have some partners and we have some junior partners, but mostly we have a labor pool that we've developed over the years. They're mostly BigLaw trained 10-year plus associates, which are, for whatever reason, have been detached from BigLaw. A lot of them are women with families or guys that want to do other things but want to continue to practice law. We hire them, and we've been using this pool now for a long time. We use them on a contractor basis. They're not sitting on the balance sheet. We pay them out of the deal. Same thing with experts. The last thing I want is tax experts and CFIS experts and HSR experts sitting on my balance sheet doing nothing, and I have to pay them. We've developed relationships with a lot of other boutique law firms that are proficient in those areas. And we pay them, by the meal. When we need them, we pay them. And from the client perspective, it's one single invoice, just like a general contractor building your house. It gets one invoice, but people feed in through the mile. So labor is the second one. The third one, again, a little bit of a backstory. You should talk to Lenny one day. He's the architect of our technology platform, Lenny Nuera. He's a technology commercialization lawyer by trade, but he's a developer and a computer science graduate from Boston College. Back when we didn't have a lot of people, 7, 8 years ago, and we started surprisingly generating some M&A work, I asked him to help out organizing the data, organizing the due diligence. And he, of course, being the curious innovator that he is, he was not an M&A lawyer by trade. He had been involved a little bit with IP, and he was a Thatcher Prophet and whatever, Greenberg Traurig, but he was never, a main deal guy. He's looking over my shoulder, and he's saying, you understand we're working on a fixed fee here. Why are you doing it that way? The most inefficient piece of the M&A process or any deal process is the management of the data, the due diligence is being produced by the seller or whoever the target company.
Explain what that is, the due diligence.
Due diligence is the documentation, the DNA of the company that's raising money or it's selling to a target. So it's the financials, it's their HR policies and their employment contracts, it's their customer contracts, it's their IP licenses, their inbound licenses. It's the whole DNA of what they do. And a lot of people listening to this podcast, it's not particularly well organized, especially if they haven't raised venture funding, if they're just bootstrapped entrepreneurs. So there's this mass of unstructured data that now the buyer, let's stick with M&A, the buyer needs to investigate. So the buyer is going to give you what's called a due diligence request, which is often a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet with 1,000 or 500 requests for documents and questions. And then after that, they're going to produce a definitive agreement. We talked about the LOI, the letter of intent. The second step is a definitive agreement. That definitive agreement is going to contain all kinds of representations and warranties where the seller has to represent and warrant as to its DNA. I don't have any liabilities, I don't have any litigation, or I have a litigation, I don't have any ERISA issues. And that drives schedules that need to be produced by the seller. The seller has to produce schedules to respond to the disclosures. And then finally, there's an integration step at the end of the process when the company is bought, where that data has to be siphoned now into the silos of the buyer. And historically, in BigLaw, that's a multi-step process where the same young lawyers go to the same data every step of the process, the due diligence delivery, the answering of the questions, the representation warranties, the disclosure schedules. So what Lenny's brilliant insight here is we should only go to the data once. The data should flow into the proper silos so we don't have to go back and dig for it at every step of the process. Put it into a collaborative platform where everybody can see it and answer the questions in a data form. And we looked at Smartsheet, and we used that for a while, and we gravitated to Airtable, afterward, because that was the perfect place. It's not the perfect place, but it's an automated data sheet. And we created an environment, essentially to chaperone the data through each step of the process. We organized it, we tag it, we parse it, and then we flow it through the proper silos. And it's a process we created purely internally for us in order to enable us to offer, so we used less labor so that we could offer fixed fee pricing. And we've added to it over the years. We've added elements that extract data from the data, intelligence from the data, so we can answer questions, to draft simple documents, to do closing binders. Chad, it was the classic consulting firm builds an internal tool to make themselves more efficient. But then over time, the tool becomes more interesting than the service part of the business.
When you call it deal driver.
And we call it deal driver, yes.
Using Airtable, Smartsheets. At what point are you actually, I assume it's Lenny, maybe hire somebody, building your own code, like adding to the platform your own bespoke work?
Yeah, so again, purely accidental, Chad. I mean, we built this tool And the tool, Lenny will tell you, is a Frankenstein monster. It's Airtable with 10 other applications, with Power Automate from Microsoft and all these APIs. And it's not a platform that can be handed over to a third party. It's what we use it internally. We train and we use a lot of what we call human intelligence, paralegals, not lawyers, to do the first pass with technology and now with AI to extract intelligence. So the surprise that happened, Chad, is that buyers who don't care as much as sellers about the price, so we can bring our price down, but what they care about is the strength of the deal, how good the deal is and how good the data is. They started appreciating the way we were handling the data. We call it better deals, better data, because it's surfacing issues. And they're the ones who started asking us to add functionality. Can you do this? Can you do that? Can you create separate silos, separate windows for different groups? We couldn't do that in Airtable. And over the years, we keep adding functionality. And then about a year and a half ago, we decided to go and actually spin the platform out into a separate company, which is what Deal Driver is today. And we went out and raised a little bit of money, a lot of our own money, but we raised some money mostly from our own clients who have used it. And we're in the process right now of doing what you're asking, which is that we have a development team in India, which is porting the entire platform to a commercial place that we're going to own. And we're about, I would say, with long way into that process. We're probably a month or two away from beta testing it.
That's great. And what you said, the clients were coming to you. You surfaced ideas and stuff from the data, but they came to you and said, "We want more." What were you presenting to them? Sounds like maybe some access to data, but were you giving reports? Were you giving them access to the interface? Like what were you providing?
Well, we were given them Airtable, and Airtable is a collaborative platform. That's one of the problems with Airtable is what we can't do is we can't compartmentalize the groups, and that's a problem because everybody sees everything all the time. So the only way we could create like a seller team or a buyer team that only they can, we'd have to create a replica and replicate, which is not efficient. When we're coming out with is going to have these different rooms. But we gave them access to Airtable and where they could, to our Deal Driver platform, where they could engage in dialogue with the seller about the due diligence. Yes, you've posted this financial statement, but what is this entry? So we're providing real-time dialogue over the data. We're providing reports as to who had the data and who's made changes. And over time, we started producing the disclosure schedules, again, in a sort of a collaborative environment where the drafts are eventually ported to Word, but the cooking is done in Airtable, where the buyer and the seller are collaborating. So, and the other thing we added was this concept of extracting intelligence from the data. So we created a process using Microsoft Power Automate and paralegals, we call them, that are extracting intelligence from the data, core information about consents, size of the contract, term of the contract, duration, indemnities, other hot button issues. You could customize it deal by deal. And then we could provide reports. So under our platform, if you want to see, the top 100 customers in terms of size, in terms of the size of the customer, you can draw those reports. It's just it's all automated. So they liked all that. That's the private equity funds, by the way, they don't hire us. They still don't hire us. They still use Kirkland and Ellis and Allen and Overy, but they refer their targets to us because they like the way we organize the data for them.
That's a nice little niche there. So you mentioned several, you talked about it a few minutes ago, and then you've mentioned it a few times during the tech piece, but explain who does what there in the Flatiron model. You mentioned partners, junior partners, contract lawyers, it sounds like, and paralegals. Who's doing what here?
Paralegals are dealing with the data. We actually have two businesses. We have a due diligence business, which isn't really different than an LSAP, except I have technology to back it up. And sometimes we just sell that. So that's the part of the business that Lenny runs, and we're going to add AI because this all be the experience we have with Codex. We're going to use some of the learning to extract intelligence from the data as well. So we have a team that does due diligence. Ultimately, there's automation, there's paralegals, there's a junior level or middle level associate type person then that the data flows to, and then ultimately it goes to Lenny or one of the other partners. On the deal side, I run the deal side. And I manage the team. It's a lean team, but it's a lot of partner level work because we're leveraged. We're leveraged by technology, not by bodies. I have a team of usually one or two big firm trained associates that are reporting to me, that are doing drafting or reviewing. And I'm usually doing the high level, me or one of my contemporaries, Kristen or Mark, are doing the negotiating. So it's not all that different from the BigLaw model, except I'm using a lot less bodies and I'm leveraging process and tech a lot more than they are.
Let's talk about Codex. Good segue here. You just mentioned it. Explain your work with Codex. As I understand it, you work with Megan Ma there. And what you're building is a tool that helps train lawyers to negotiate and get through these M&A deals. Is that an accurate kind of description of what the end goal is?
That was the goal. I'll go through the backstory, but what we've actually done is create a process to label really complex data, as opposed to Wang's company, which is labeling non-complex data. And so it has application beyond just the learning component, the negotiation component. But again, I got a little bit of a backstory without boring everybody to death. But because we're Flatiron, and we've been Flatiron now for a while, we have Deal Driver, and Deal Driver has some publicity out there. We present at events all the time. And Codex approached us. We ran into Megan at one of the Cali Innovators things, and they were working on a project to use AI to create a simulated agent to negotiate M&A with young lawyers to help train them to how to respond in various scenarios. And they asked us to help in that because, again, we can do it, and there's not, we're already in the progressive end of the industry. So what was initially, supposed to be a very small project turned out to be a fairly significant project. And it goes back to what you were saying before about AI and the knowledge. What we had to do that, it's not enough to just, this is where the people make mistake. It's not enough to just throw documents at the model, because documents reflect the end result of a stream of negotiation. They don't reflect the decision tree that resulted in the document. They just resulted in the end product. What you need to capture is the decision tree, the process that the senior lawyer or the mid-level lawyer goes through to negotiate. So we started by cutting a very small sliver of the M&A term sheet that we talked about before. I'm not ambitious enough to try to automate the entire definitive agreement. And we went to an area that was manageable. We went to the liability profile. If you know anything about M&A, there's a song and dance, but it's fairly structured about, fundamental versus non-fundamental representations, survival periods, caps, baskets. What we found, Chad, is just throwing complex issues without guidance to the model resulted in crap. It wasn't useful at all. So we went through a long process where guided the model.
What was the process? What did you do? What was the logistics of it?
The logistics were that I essentially wrote a treatise, and Lenny translated it, parsed it, and fed it to the model piece by piece. A fundamental rep is this. A non-fundamental rep is this.
Did he put it in JSON or something? We changed it into computer kind of digestive language?
No, we have developers who do that.
That was done.
Yes, that was done. Yeah. So there's a Codex development team sitting behind this, and there's a whole team behind this. So we went through an exercise, and it wasn't just a treatise, but it was also what's market. The survival period is 12 months to 18 months. A fundamental rep. A lot of times buyers are trying to expand fundamental reps to pick up intellectual property. If that happens, the proper response is, let's create a hybrid category. And this is a multi-month period. It was extremely frustrating to me because sadly enough, I was the intelligence behind this experiment. After about 6 months, you can play with the model. And in fact, if you want to, you can play with the old model. It's online. I don't know if it still is online.
We should explain what the model is if it's the one that I looked at, you ready for today. It simulates a negotiation. You can choose your level. You can be a partner. You can be a junior partner. You can be associate. And based on that, it's going to give you what you're negotiating. It's going to present the issue. You send, you position to the other side. The AI sits across the table from you, negotiates back, and you go back and forth.
So what happened after about 6 months, I was playing the negotiator because, I was the original point of content. But again, back to your point, senior content, right? You're taking the knowledge of a 35-year M&A lawyer and the decision tree, and you're guiding the model. And then there was an interaction where I asked the model, I told the model, I'm the buyer, and I said, I want 100% cap and I want a 5-year survival period. And the model came back to me and said, that's crazy. You're way off market. It should be 10% in 18 months. And that's when I went, wow. And that's cool. Now suddenly I've been able to guide the model to handle a very complex issue through this labeling process. And now you're going to ask me, where are we now? Then we rolled out the little demo at Codex back in April, and we rolled that out at Cali Innovators and other places. And now, of course, it's now become a private company, and that was a whole open source project. It's available on the whatever that platform's called, but now we have a much more ambitious project that we're working on to try to automate the balance of this exercise. And to your point, we're creating a negotiation simulator. What we've really done is created a process for labeling complex data. So that it's labeling and parsing complex data so the model can handle very complex issues. So it has application way beyond, just the simulator.
What is the future goal then? If you want to move beyond the negotiation simulator, what's your end goal now?
I'm not sure, Chad. I think every law school wants to use the product. What we want to do now is complete the simulator. And we want to do it in a way where we bring a process and a technology to the client, and the client can put its own data in there. We teach them how to do it, or they can use our default data. So we want to get to a point where, we complete the simulator for M&A. And then from there, there million people want to do a million things with it, and that's still to be determined.
Well, Conrad, I appreciate your time. People want to learn more about Flatiron, get a hold of you, learn more about the Codex product. Where do you want to send them?
Listen, we're at Flatiron running Flatiron. So, I'm at my email, ceverhard@flatiron.legal, and our website, flatiron.legal, tells a lot about our model.
Okay, that's a wrap for today's episode. As always, we really appreciate you listening. If you want to subscribe, you can find us on most major podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. Also, if you like us enough, I hope you leave us a favorable review. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, this has been Technically Legal.